All right, my name's Dan Sullivan. I'm a software solutions architect in the pre-sales team in the Americas region. And I came over to Cisco as part of the TailF acquisition. It isn't? It's not on? I didn't touch this thing. How does it turn on? It says it's on. You can hear it? Okay. So I came over to Cisco as part of the TailF acquisition. And I spent most of my time working with service provider customers and helping them with NSO. And they asked me today to talk a little bit about service modeling and how I go about that. So I have a few slides, and we'll go through that and see how it goes. And then after, I'm supposed to build a service on the fly, so that'll be really fun. And you'll get to see how successfully my typing skills translate in front of a crowd. And my laptop is having some troubles with, let's see. All right, that looks right. So just here's the agenda, but nothing interesting there. So the idea here is just maybe a few simple themes that I try to use. Maybe they'll be helpful to you. And some insight that I've gained, and kind of a few product features that I use and that I think are good to understand when you're building a service. And hopefully this is all interactive. So if you have any questions at any time, don't hesitate. So when you're getting started, there's no substitute for knowledge. That's the first thing I'll say is, after you go through a proof of concept or something like that, take advantage of any knowledge you can, whether it's the classes or NSO comes with a ton of examples. And in fact, when I came aboard TailF, we didn't have any training at all. In fact, they send you a tar file of NSO and tell you to learn via the examples. So it can be done, but there's much better and much better training available these days. So certainly take advantage of that. And then lastly, the Developers Hub. If you haven't been on there, definitely check that stuff out. You can post questions, and then a lot of the developers and myself, a lot of people will answer questions on those. So we try to keep a pretty close eye on it. I would say, don't do your debugging on it. Don't be afraid to, read a manual or something before you post questions. We don't want to make it like an NSO Google, but definitely you can post questions and get examples. And when you're getting started, especially when I go to customer sites, a lot of times the customers will have other meetings and they'll say, this is probably what we're going to do. And when I get there, it's always something different. So a lot of times we have to start from scratch. So I would say, usually pick something relatively easy, get it working, and then you can iterate on it. A lot of times people say, they're going to spend many hours, many weeks architecting their service. And I don't think that's the way to go about it. In fact, when you have a tool like this, like NSO, you can actually iterate so quickly that it doesn't really make sense to spend a month on something that, in all likelihood, once you get involved and there's other organizations, your service model will change and your requirements will change. So I would say, iterate early and often is what I normally do. And, like I said, get something simple, and you can add complexity. That's fine to have complicated service models, but make sure you know why you're doing it. And so after a while, it'll become obvious if you need to solve a certain problem a certain way. Then you can add complexity to what you're doing. And lastly, if you're having trouble getting requirements, there just doesn't seem to be enough information around, well, that just means you're the architect. So you just have to kind of bite the bullet and get something going and let people react to it. So don't be afraid to jump into the deep end on that. We talk about top down versus bottoms up. I think number one, it's always great to abstract as much data as you can for your service. You know, maybe the optimal benefit is if you've been through this, you'll know that oh, we got a lot of people coming in here.
Yeah, the door locked, so we couldn't get in.
I know, I did that on purpose. Apparently, a lot of people read the agenda wrong and they came to this one. I'm not sure why. We'll find out. Hopefully, all the people that came in weren't people that were thrown out for being disturbing in the previous one, and that's where they came to this one. But we'll see what happens. Yes, thanks. I was hoping for that. Luckily, this room is hidden away well enough that a lot of people that work on my team can't find it, so they won't be able to come and harass me, except for one guy. So as far as top-down, bottoms-up go, it's always important to abstract as much data as you can from your service. It's good not to let that stuff trickle up into your portal or whatever's driving NSO, because usually those are more expensive iterations when you have to get it, and a lot of times it's a different group, and to get them involved with making service changes to your service model, that can be a problem. So abstract what you can. You know, on the downside, you could probably abstract everything, but then your model and your implementation is going to be more complex. So I would say avoid doing that. And again, it's so easy to iterate on this stuff. I don't really believe in spending a ton of time iterating on the model when a lot of times it doesn't even occur to people what they really want until they see an example from you. You know what I mean? And then they start to say, oh, wouldn't it be great if the model was this way? Well, if you just spent 6 weeks architecting your model and then everyone changes it on you, it seems like a wasted effort. So myself, I typically start from the bottom, and the reason why I tend to work that way is because a lot of times when I go to customers to do some sort of proof of concept, they always know this is what I want in the network. You know, I want NSO to push out this configuration for this use case into the network. So they usually have that piece of it. So I usually start with that. But again, you know, you kind of start where you have the most data available. You know, we have templates only versus Java and Python. In general, don't write a single line of Java or Python unless you know exactly why you're doing it. I've seen way too many services written with oodles of code that could be accomplished simply using a template. Every time you change a line of Python or you recompile your Java code, that equals one thing. You need a complete testing cycle, right? So I always try to avoid doing that if I can. And one popular design thing that I've seen is you build your service and you have a template with $ variables, and then people write Java code to extract the service model parameters and then populate a template. So that's a bad reason to write code. Don't do that. There's no reason for that. And sort of lastly, a plug for the NSO template engine. So in the latest release in 4.6, some of you guys may have seen it, but there's some new features that have come out in the template. More ability to control how the template is implemented. You can create variables and things like that. So there's even less need to write a lot of code. So if you haven't looked at 4.6, definitely take a look at some of the template functionality there. Let NSO do the work for you. So we have a lot of people. We even have one guy sitting in the front row there whose job it is to make the templating engine and make NSO run faster. There aren't a lot of people spending a lot of time trying to make Java constructs run faster, the Java API libraries run faster, but they work really hard to keep NSO performance and improve that all the time. From a scalability perspective, hey, understand the requirements of the service that you're going to deploy. Is it something that's going to be deployed in a network of 100 devices, or do you have 100,000 devices that you're going to need to touch? Are you going to need to use partial sync and things like that? Do you need, or most importantly, if you're going to need to potentially do this using LSA, you might want to even account for that initially. So if you're starting out with a single node and you know that you're going to go to an LSA environment, maybe you build a stack service to begin with or something like that. So I have a small demo that will involve me building a service and typing a lot, but hopefully not too much. And all I'm really going to do is sort of make a service out of a simple Cisco VRF for an XR device. So I thought I'd just walk through some of the steps that I use. Hopefully some of it resonates. If not, sorry. All right, so that's the end of the great slideshow. Let's see if I can. All right. Well, that's interesting. Hold on one second. PowerPoint seemingly has taken over my laptop. All right. All right. So, I'm going to demonstrate building a service. So right now I have NSO installed on my laptop, and I have just the following packages. So I have Cisco iOS, XR, and NTool. So I'm going to cheat. If this NTool is something that's on the public Git repository, I wrote it. It generates service templates from CLI config. Otherwise, it would take me a lot longer, and the chances that I would get it right in front of a room full of people are slim and none. So we'll use that tool. So to start off, because I already lectured everyone saying not to use Java or Python, we'll build a template-only config. So for now, I'm just going to build a service package here. As you can see me on the bottom. All right, so we're good to go. We built a package. I'm going to cheat here, and let's see. I have a completed copy of this service squirreled away in case things go horribly wrong, but I will steal the CLI directory and copy it into my new. Yep, I'm already in there, right? Yep. So I'm just going to copy. There's this, for NTool, you create a CLI directory, and then you just, and I'll show you the contents of that. So. Yeah. Sorry. So I just stole this CLI directory from a completed, so I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So I have one file in there called vrftemplate.config. So NSO, by definition, when you generate a service, it will create a template, and we'll call it vrftemplate.xml. So this tool will actually generate an XML template of the same name. So this template file basically is sort of a variabilized version of the CLI for this VRF. So if you were to type in all these commands on a Cisco router, this is roughly what you would see. I'm going to change this a little bit. All right. So this is basically just Cisco CLI. I put some variables in, and then roughly these variables will match my service parameters. So just going to remove that swap thing. And so then from NSO, I can run ntool. And then I can just tell it the package, and it's verf. So it says it found that verf template config file, and it generated a template for me. So we can take a quick look at that. So incidentally, this template engine, this template tool will generate, it will create a directory using the version of the NED that you generated the tool from. So if you were using different versions of the NED, you could generate the same output and then compare them and see did something change between NED versions. So. And so roughly we have this kind of template here. And this is pretty close to the service template that I think we will want at the end. So we'll find out. So from here, we can, if we want, just copy this over to and there's one thing we will need to we don't have a service point in here. So since we built the template only, we just need a service point. So it's I think that's it. So now we sort of have a template in place that roughly matches that CLI config. And now we need to build a model that reflects the parameters. So in true top-down approach, we'll do just that. So if I so we have this verf.yang file. So if we take a quick look here. Okay, so here's the dummy file that NSO generates for you. And most of this we don't need. If many of you used to, there used to be some great stuff that we would generate as part of this package where it would check every device in your network to see if it was in sync. We don't do that anymore, which is nice. So if you remember, when I generated the file, I called the verf name vname. So we'll make that the key to our service. We sort of had a description initially, so we have a string, and then we're going to have a list of devices so that we can apply this template to a number of devices. As with any list, we'll need a key. We'll just call it name. And that sort of matches what I had in my template, so that's good. We can bring up the template just to make sure. All right, so we kind of can see how we're doing with so we had the device name. That'll be a leaf. And that should be type leaf ref, right? We want to make sure that nobody gets to use any devices that aren't part of NCS. All right, that looks good. We had, and obviously for this VRF, there's a few more parameters. I only did IPv4, the same exists for v6, and there's a few other parameters. We can make it more complicated, but for the purposes of this discussion, or at least when this started, I didn't realize it was a 90-minute slot. So hopefully hopefully I don't need 90 minutes to get this model working. If we do, it'll be disappointing. So we'll have leaf RD. So I'll just leave it a string for now. And then we'll have also import route policy. And I guess we should have an export policy as well. And maybe as we go, we might, once we iterate through this, maybe we'll make our types stronger so that we can make sure that, hey, if you had a specific way that you name route policies and things of that, we could do a much better job and tighten it up. But for now, we'll focus on actually generating some, see if we can generate the config first. So, and we'll have a leaf list of route targets. So we'll have route targets first. Someone asked me if this was going to be a boring presentation. I see he's made his decision. He's not here anymore. Go ahead. Yeah, I possibly could have done that. I've thought about that, and that's. But then the problem with that is you can't always infer the type from the template too, right? So usually I usually know what parameters I want, so usually I sort of do it in a different order, but your point's well taken. In general, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and that's one thing that I always talk to the NSO developers about is more ways to auto-render a lot of this stuff. And I think that, you'll see like there's the templatize command, there's a few other, there's some work being done with NSO in general. And like using this end tool was more or less a way just to show people, hey, we could auto render a few things, and maybe we need to think about it. And then we had the prefix limit and threshold. So leaf. So I think that's about it. Next, we'll see if we can actually build this. So if we save this quickly. Well, you don't see that too often. I think.
Usually when I look out for it, no upload successful, okay.
Yeah, I think that's in the make file though. My make file just doesn't have that.
All right.
But if it does fail, usually there's no, you don't have to guess.
Yeah, I'm looking for it.
Yeah. All right, so I was actually able to build that model, and that may be actually the first time in my life I wrote a model and compiled it successfully and doing it in front of a crowd. I'm in a full sweat, but you can't see. All right, so we have a model loaded. I created an XML representation of what I hoped would be the model we wind up with. I think it's not quite so, but let's see. Merge. Okay, so in my model, I had route distinguisher instead of RD. So I spelled it wrong. Okay. And then over here in our template, I could probably change that too. All right, so I did have to compile it again, but you know. All right, one more package reload and we might be cooking with gas. Okay. And so, this sort of illustrates one of the points I was making earlier. You know, you can get so many turns a day with this, right? That's the most important thing when you're building a service is how many times a day can you recompile and test it? And usually with NSO, it's really quick. So I always build services for the most part on my laptop, and I'll use NetSim and iterate through it. So functionally, it's what I want. You know, hardware's a lot harder to come by, and actually, you would think in Cisco that there was an endless supply of hardware that I would be able to use, but it's not really like that. In fact, you have to beg, borrow, and steal when you want a real device to connect to. And the other thing is, of course, that a lot of the work we do is with third-party devices as well. So most of our customers are multi-vendor. When we go to do proof of concepts and things like that, most customers, they don't say, well, let's see a Cisco device. That's usually the multi-vendor thing they're skeptical about, so we usually do a lot with that. Let's test, right? All right, show. All right, so I loaded in an example. I loaded in a config. Got some route targets. I set some prefix limits and things like that. Okay. And let's see. It looks like we're actually doing the right thing from a device perspective. So we can actually see if we can commit it. So not bad. I mean, we built a service in 35 minutes, and I even had some number of boring slides at the beginning. So, you know, again, this sort of goes back to what I was saying. You know, do something, get it working, take a look at it, and then iterate on it. You know, don't buy into the hype about the 6 months of time you need to spend architecting your services. And especially something like this, you would imagine some set of low-level services. Like, so if you were building layer 3 VPNs, part of that would be constructing a VRF. So you might build, you know, a VRF service and then have your high layer VPN service be a stack service encompassing, you know, a VRF service or you know, and something you do to an interface. So, you know, small increments and getting something working and proving to the people that you're working for that, hey, this automation stuff works and I can actually build something and deploy it is definitely a good thing to do. That's all I have from a typing perspective, but if people have questions. Yeah, I cheated. Yeah, I'll show you. So I could have typed it all in. So I could have said set, set verif and all that. And that would be a lot of typing and not as entertaining as I am just riffing up here. So I just created, so what I did was, I did this, right? So I created this service ahead of time. I created this verif service and I show verif display XML like this. And then I did a save and I called it test.xml. And I save it, and then I can just load merge it in. And in fact, I do that a lot of times when I'm building services. I'll build some test cases and just load merge them in there so that I don't. And of course, this same thing you can roughly do via, you could do it via REST if you wanted, but I tend to, when I'm just building services, I tend to use the CLI. But that's normally what I do. Especially if you have a complicated service or something like this. All of the, if it's of interest, you can all, the code will be available. You'll be able to download it from someplace. I'm not sure where yet, but if that's of interest. And the tool that I was using to generate the config is already available on the public NSO package GitHub repository if you want to try it out. And it works for most CLI NEDs. For the netconf NEDs, you're a little bit on your own. I've done some work with trying to do netconf, provide netconf support for Juniper and be able to auto-render some of that. And it's limited success because the Juniper Yang model that we use is not compatible one-for-one with like the Juno CLI. So it's really hard to go from one to the other. Not hard, but there's a few gotchas in there. Anyone else have any questions?
I was used to see actually. Yes, hi. I was used to see actually Python-based templates, which use actually a $sign variable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Normal template-based is actually using / and then the variable, but I don't see you using a / only in two spaces.
Right. So let's take a look at good question. So number one, I would argue with you that normal templates are these. Abnormal templates are the one with a lot of $sign variables in them. So the reason why is because in this service it's fairly simple. So all I'm really going to do is read from the model itself. So to read from the model and populate $sign variables and then call a template seems like not a good use of time. So what I'm doing in this template here is I'm actually reading. So if you look at the line 7 of the template there, it says /devices/name. So that is at the top level service, right? I'm reading the list of devices by name. And after that, everything is relative to that context. My context will change. So I'll read the route distinguisher, which is line 32 in the Yang model. So I'm basically reading directly from the model. And I would say it's preferable to read directly from the model whenever you can. So populating, even if you use, if you have Python or Java code to do other calculations and variables that you have to calculate, that's fine. You can make those $sign variables if you need to. But there's no reason to, even if you use Python, you can still read directly from the model into your template. So you have control of the context. As long as you make the context the service when you create, when you apply the template, you can still read directly from the model. So that's one thing that's sort of people kind of get comfortable. Oh, I just pass these $sign variables, but it's we also can avoid the context switch between the Python context and then going into NSO. So if you just read from the models themselves, and this is a relatively simple service, so I didn't really need any of the newer constructs that are available in templates in 4.6. But if you use those, it's even sort of less reason to use Python or to write a lot of code in Python. Anyone else?
Hi. Okay. I was just wondering, are you going to be giving a bit more of a demonstration maybe later on of the NTOL service?
I couldn't hear you.
Are you going to be doing more of a demonstration of the NTOL package that you put together?
They gave a little demonstration of it before, but we could talk a little bit about that. I'll wait towards the end, and then if people want to stick around, I can give you a demo of that. So after this is over, I can spend a few minutes playing around with that if you like. This is really earning you money today.
Yeah.
I think that would be good for me. I feel I feel a little full after that. That salad had an amazing amount of potatoes in it. Go ahead.
Just a question about the differences in performance with respect to using variables and call-outs to Python or Java and so on,
Yeah.
compared to getting the stuff directly from the data model.
Yeah. So I think so I don't have any hard numbers as to how fast, but for customers who are building services and saying that, you heard some customers, I don't know if you heard any of the presentations earlier where people were saying, hey, the most important thing is how quickly I can perform service activation. For switching back and forth, I would say if you're just doing small stuff, it probably doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot. But I think in some of our customers that are more performance sensitive, I think it's worth taking a look at. Doug, do you know any? He's shaking his head too.
I don't know any specific numbers, but all the existing values from data needs to go through a socket back to the server. All the accessing data from Python or Java needs to go through the control socket and back. Yeah, right. But from the template, it's all run inside, so there's no such thing. But the numbers, it's terrible. It cannot be done faster than through the template.
I don't know if anyone noticed how effectively I utilized an NSO expert in the room right there. So,
Well automated.
yeah. Anything else? All right. We still have some time left, and someone was asking questions about the tool that I use to generate the template for. So we could maybe play around a little bit with that. That package again is available, and it's on the GitHub repository, so anybody can use it, whether you're internal or external to Cisco. It's visible. I do two main things with it. One is generate service templates, and then the other thing that I often do is validate whether commands are supported in the NED using this, and I can show you that maybe as a quick bonus. So let's see. So this is what I do. People often send me, a lot of times customers are getting ready to do, and if you are a customer, a lot of times you want to know, is all my config supported in the NED, or am I going to have to go and file a ticket? So this happens to me all the time, and it happened to me enough that I got tired of, you can do it with NetSim too, like you can try to bring up a NetSim and load everything in it. But I do it this way, and it's pretty close. So So I just pass ntool the config file, and it runs through it. And wherever it puts out like two stars means it doesn't support it. And then I can further look into it. Sometimes there are some commands in the NED that the path that I'm using to verify the NED aren't necessarily the exact same as what happens when you do a sync from. So the Java code in the NED does some processing that's not always in this tool, but it's pretty helpful for me. So I do this, and then I'll take a closer look at missing commands, and sometimes maybe my tool isn't quite right, but for the most part, it helps, I find. So there's a few in this one where it says, you know, where there's 2 stars. I don't know what that one, that just doesn't look right, but you know, whatever. So maybe we don't set the retransmit interval correct. Maybe it's not in the model or something like that. So that's one use. Well, I think the tool's pretty good, and I can do it quickly. Whereas if you had to build NetSims and do all that, it takes a little bit longer. So that's another use for this. You can also like you can also tell it you wanted to. You can do template. You can tell it to generate a config or and if you give it a file like that one we just gave it, it will actually generate a template, you know, a huge template, and spit it out on the screen. So sometimes people send me massive amounts, and I can just run it through this and generate a template. But, so if you wanted to, you know, so it's spit out a pretty tremendous template, which is probably bigger than you would ever use, but those are sort of the things that I do with it. More importantly, the tool is in GitHub, and it's there for a reason, and that was I just took a stab at this. So if more people use it and you find, and you're a talented programmer, you may figure out much better uses and much better ways to do things, and that would be great. You can upload it and share with everyone else in the community. So I'll certainly take a look at anyone who wants to make changes to it. So. Yeah, there's a little bit. Yeah, there's some documentation. Yeah, it's not great, but you know, it's free. It's free. That's the best part. If you give it away, you don't have to write a lot of documentation. The NSO guys aren't so lucky. Anything else? All right. Thanks for your time.